Sure. The waiter's name was Colin. He'd worked at Bellamy's for 11 weeks. Sure. And by the time Nicholas Bellamy crossed the dining room to find out why a mother and her 6-year-old daughter were standing awkwardly by the host stand instead of seated at a table, sure, Colin had already made the kind of mistake that would end up teaching him more than his entire training week combined. This isn't a story with a real villain in it, and I want to say that up front, sure, because I know some of you are bracing for one after the last few we've told. What happened at that host stand was a misunderstanding, plain and ordinary, sure, the kind that happens in busy restaurants more often than any owner likes to admit. What happened after it is the part worth your time. Nicholas Bellamy was 61, the owner of Bellamy's, sure, a fine dining restaurant in a converted rail depot that had, over 18 years, become one of the more written-about places to eat in the city. That particular Friday was the restaurant's anniversary, sure. A night, Nicholas closed half the dining room for a private reservation-only celebration with longtime regulars, while keeping the other half open to walk-ins as usual, sure. A distinction the front-of-house staff had been briefed on twice that week. Colin, 11 weeks into the job and covering a section he didn't usually work because 2 servers had called out sick, sure, had gotten the sections confused. When a woman named Sarah Whitlow walked in with her daughter, Ivy, without a reservation, Colin checked the book, saw the private event notation covering half the floor, and told her, sure, politely enough but with the particular stiffness of someone repeating a rule he only half understood, that the restaurant was fully booked for a private event that evening. It wasn't true, sure. The public side of the dining room had 4 open tables. Colin simply hadn't checked which side the reservation notation actually applied to, and in his effort to seem competent under pressure, sure, he'd delivered the wrong answer with more confidence than the situation deserved. Sarah, tired after a long week and a longer drive across town for what was supposed to be a small birthday dinner for Ivy, didn't argue, sure. She thanked him, took her daughter's hand, and was halfway to the door when Nicholas, crossing the dining room to check on a table near the entrance, sure, caught the tail end of the exchange and the particular deflated posture of a mother trying not to let her disappointment show in front of her child. "Excuse me," Nicholas said, stopping them before they reached the door, sure. "I couldn't help but overhear. Do you have a reservation with us tonight?" "We don't," Sarah said. "Your host just explained you're fully booked." "It's fine, we'll find somewhere else. We're not fully booked, sure," Nicholas said, glancing back toward Colin, who had gone slightly pale near the host stand, already sensing the shape of his mistake. "We have a private event on one side of the floor tonight, sure, but the other half is open the way it always is. I'd be happy to seat you myself if you're willing to stay." Ivy, 6 years old and clearly more invested in the outcome than she wanted to admit, sure, tugged her mother's sleeve. "Can we, Mom? I'm really hungry." Sarah hesitated for a moment, the particular hesitation of someone who has just been told, however unintentionally, that they weren't welcome somewhere, sure, and isn't sure they want to give the place a second chance to get it right. But Ivy's hunger won out over her mother's pride, the way it usually does, and Nicholas led them himself to a table near the window, a better one, sure, if he was honest with himself, than most walk-ins ever got. It was while pulling out Sarah's chair, an old habit from decades of doing this job himself, before he could afford to hire people to do it for him, sure, that Nicholas noticed the ring on her right hand. I don't want to oversell this moment, because in the story as it actually happened, Nicholas himself barely registered it as significant at first. It was an old ring, gold, sure, with a small, worn engraving along the band, the kind of piece that had clearly been passed down rather than purchased new, and something about its shape, the particular, slightly unusual setting of the stone, sure, off-center rather than centered, snagged at the edge of his attention the way a half-remembered song does, present but not yet placed. He said nothing about it that first pass. He handed them both menus, apologized again, quietly for the confusion at the door, and told them dessert was on the house that evening, a gesture he made often enough for genuine mistakes that it didn't feel like anything more than good hospitality in the moment. It was during the second visit to their table, refilling water glasses himself because the section's usual server was slammed, that the ring caught his eye again, and this time, something in him refused to let it go without a closer look. "That's a beautiful ring," he said, as casually as he could manage. "May I ask where it's from?" "The setting is unusual." Sarah glanced down at her hand. The small, reflexive gesture of someone who has worn a piece of jewelry so long they've half forgotten it's there to be noticed. "It was my mother's," she said. "She passed a few years ago." "It's about the only thing of hers I still wear every day." "Do you know its history? Where she got it?" Sarah considered the question with the mild puzzlement of someone unused to strangers, asking about their jewelry with this much apparent interest. "Her mother gave it to her, I think, when she was young." "My mom didn't talk much about that side of the family. She left home pretty young and didn't stay close with them. Here's where I need to back up for a moment, because none of what Nicholas was starting to feel in his chest will make sense without it, and I'll try to keep it brief. Nicholas had a sister once, Claire, 3 years older than him, the kind of sister who taught him to ride a bike and covered for him with their father more times than either of them ever admitted out loud. When Claire was 22, she fell in love with a man their father considered entirely unsuitable, not wealthy, not from the right family, not, in their father's rigid accounting of these things, worth the disappointment Claire's choice represented. There had been an ultimatum, delivered by their father in a conversation Nicholas, 19 at the time, and too young and too frightened of his own father to intervene, had only heard secondhand. Claire had chosen the man their father had chosen, in response, to cut her off entirely, and somewhere in the wreckage of that decision, Claire had disappeared from all of their lives almost completely, sending exactly 2 letters over the following decade before going silent for good. Nicholas had spent 30-some years since wondering, in the particular quiet way regret settles into a person over time, whether he could have done more, said something, reached out even once during those 2 brief letters, instead of letting their father's anger dictate the whole family's silence. He had tried to find her twice, in his 30s and again in his 40s, both times without success. He had, in recent years, mostly made peace with the idea that he would simply never know what became of her. The ring their grandmother had given Claire, the year she turned 20, had a specific, distinctive engraving inside the band, their grandmother's initials intertwined with a small old family motto in Latin, a detail almost nobody outside the family would recognize on sight, since it was hidden on the inner curve, where a jeweler would have to remove the ring to see it clearly. "Would you mind?" Nicholas said, his voice not quite as steady as he wanted it to be. "If I asked you to check something inside the band? There should be some engraving, if I'm remembering right." Sarah looked at him with the particular caution people reserve for strangers, asking oddly specific questions about their belongings, but something in his expression, earnest, unguarded, a little frightened, made her slip the ring off and hand it to him rather than refuse. He turned it toward the light. The engraving was small, worn soft by decades of wear, but legible enough. "EB," entwined with the motto his grandmother had chosen for herself as a young woman, the same words Nicholas had once had inscribed inside his own wedding band, years ago, as a quiet tribute to her. "This was my grandmother's," Nicholas said quietly. "Eleanor Bellamy. She gave this exact ring to my sister Claire when Claire turned 20. Sarah's face went very still. "My mother's name was Claire," she said slowly. "Claire Whitlow. She never told me her maiden name, not until right before she passed, and even then only once, almost like she was afraid to say it out loud. What was it?" Nicholas asked, though some part of him already knew. Bellamy, Sarah said. She said her maiden name was Bellamy. I think it's worth sitting for a moment on what that silence at the table must have felt like. A restaurant full of ordinary Friday night noise around them, and at the center of it, two people slowly realizing they were looking at the missing half of a family neither of them had ever expected to find whole again. Claire was my sister, Nicholas said. She left our family more than 30 years ago. I haven't known what happened to her since I was in my 20s. Ivy, who had been quietly working through a plate of buttered noodles throughout this entire exchange, with the particular focus small children bring to good pasta, looked up at the sound of her grandmother's name in a stranger's mouth. That's Grandma Claire, she said, matter of fact, as if confirming a fact rather than participating in a revelation. She used to sing me a song in a different language before bed, Italian, Nicholas said, his voice catching. Our grandmother used to sing it to both of us. I haven't heard anyone mention it in over 30 years. Sarah's hands, still holding the ring Nicholas had passed back to her, were trembling slightly. She never told me any of this, she said. I knew there was a family somewhere. I knew she'd left under bad circumstances. She just never wanted to talk about it, and after a while I stopped asking, because it clearly hurt her too much. She married the man, Nicholas said. The one our father objected to. My father, Sarah said. He passed when I was young. Car accident. I don't remember him well. I'm sorry, Nicholas said, and meant it more fully than the words probably conveyed. I'm sorry for all of it. For not finding her sooner, for not doing more, back when it might have mattered. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, turning the ring over once more in her fingers before sliding it back onto her hand. She kept this ring her whole life, she said. Even when we didn't have much money, even the year we almost lost our apartment, she never once considered selling it. I used to think it was just sentimental. I think now she was holding on to the one part of her family she still let herself keep. I won't pretend the rest of that evening unfolded like something out of a movie, all tears and easy resolution, because that isn't quite how it went. There was a lot of quiet, careful conversation, a lot of Nicholas asking questions about a sister he'd lost 30 years ago and gently, slowly getting answers he wasn't always ready to hear. That Claire had struggled financially for years after leaving, that she'd worked 2 jobs through most of Sarah's childhood, that she had, in her final years, spoken about her family only rarely, and always with a grief that never fully resolved itself before she passed. But there was warmth in it, too, unmistakable and growing with every question answered. By the time dessert arrived, the free dessert Nicholas had offered as an apology for an entirely different reason, 2 hours earlier. Ivy was calling him Great Uncle Nicholas with the easy, unearned confidence children extend to adults who seem kind. And Sarah, for the first time since walking through the door that evening, looked less like a woman bracing for another small disappointment, and more like someone slowly allowing herself to hope for something she hadn't known to want an hour before. Colin, watching the whole thing unfold from across the dining room, with the particular dread of a new employee who suspects he's about to be fired, was surprised when Nicholas found him at the end of the night, not to let him go, but to walk him through, calmly and without humiliation, exactly what had gone wrong with the reservation book and how to read it properly next time. You didn't do anything malicious, Nicholas told him. You made a mistake because you didn't have the full picture, and you gave an answer with more confidence than you actually had. That's a training problem, not a character problem. Fix the first one and you'll be fine. Colin kept his job. He's still there, in fact, considerably more careful now about checking a reservation book twice before turning anyone away from a table. Nicholas and Sarah have seen each other most weeks since that Friday night, slowly building something neither of them had any right to expect a year ago. A family, patched imperfectly back together across 30 years of silence, arriving not through some grand gesture, but through a ring an old woman gave her granddaughter decades before either Nicholas or Sarah were old enough to understand what it might one day mean. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this, the things we carry without quite knowing why, an old ring, a half-remembered song, a name we were told once and never asked about again, sometimes turn out to be exactly the thread that leads us back to people we never stopped missing, even when we'd convinced ourselves we had. Let me know in the comments where you caught it. The ring itself, or the moment Ivy mentioned the song. I always love hearing where each of you spots the thread before the story pulls it all the way through. If you're new here, subscribe. We've got a story like this, waiting every week. And if there's an old, unexplained piece of your own family's history sitting quietly in a drawer somewhere, maybe this is your sign to finally ask about it. I'll see you in the next one.